Hey guys, this is Caspi with Tape, and today you join me for a brand new series. Well, more of a mini-series, but yes, this is Realism Overhaul, hence everything looking a bit different. So, if you don't know, Realism Overhaul makes all of the planets and everything realistic to the real world. We have Earth and Mars and Venus, etc., and they're all the right size. And there's a bunch of mods that make rockets actually realistic. So, yes, that's what we're doing. And the goal of this series is, by the time this decade is out, to put a Kerbal on the moon. Not because it is easy, but because it is hard. So, yeah, jumping into the tracking station, you can get a good look at Earth. There's America and North America and South America and Africa and Europe and Asia and the North Pole. Jeez, yeah, there it is. So, yeah, and out here, very far away, in an inclined orbit, we have the moon. So, this is Sandbox. I'm not going to be doing this in career mode. I'm not doing an RP0, Real Progression 0 series, because that would take ages. So, yeah, this will probably be like 10 episodes of slowly progressing my technology, getting better at Realism Overhaul. I haven't played it in quite a long time, so I'm going to need some practice. But, yeah, and then eventually we will put Kerbals on the moon, and it will be fantastic. So, yeah, let's just get right into it with our first vehicle. I'm going to hand you over to past me to go into the VAB and explain the first vehicle. Yes, thank you, future me. Here we are in the VAB with the Athena 1, our first vehicle. So I'm just going to talk you through the rocket. So, it's a two-stage rocket. The first stage has 2 engines, the second stage has 1 engine, and then it has this payload up here. So let's just go through it really quickly. Firstly, it has 8 kilometers per second of delta V in total, hopefully enough to get to orbit. And its first stage is a kerosene and liquid oxygen powered stage using the LR79 series engines, which provide 774 kilonewtons of thrust each, and I think these were used in the Juno and Jupiter rockets, and the Juno Centaur rockets, something like that. So yes, American early rocket families is what these were used in, and yes, it's just a pretty decent sized stage, 2.8 meters in diameter, as is the whole rocket. The second stage between this procedural payload fairing is, of course, here. And it is using the, what's it called? It's the RL-10 series vacuum engine, another American engine, I think used in pretty much all the Delta rockets, the Centaur stages, and I think from the description I read the Saturn 1 vehicle in the upper stage maybe. And yes, this provides 74 kilonewtons of thrust, not a ton, but this is a pretty light upper stage. You can see it's 6.9 tons in total because it's just using liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, which is very not dense. And yes, it provides 6 kilonewtons of 6,000 meters per second of delta V to push this on into orbit, and is good for light payloads. All of these fuel tanks are procedural, by the way, so if I did want to make it a little more effective, I could just increase the size like this. But yes, that is the second stage, and the payload. On top of this payload adapter is a small satellite, the Athena 1 satellite. The vehicle, by the way, is called the Centaur launch vehicle. Not the Centaur, the Minotaur launch vehicle. Nope. Taurus launch vehicle. All of the things with horns. It's the Taurus 1. The satellite is based around the 1-ton satellite bus. It's not 1 ton because this whole thing weighs 770 kilograms. So yes, this is a small test satellite. It's rudimentary and it's just testing our initial capabilities. Help me learn how to fly rockets. And yeah, it is a communications satellite. It has 2 of these solar panels here, these 1x3s, as you can see. And in the third side, it has an antenna, a dish, and this can go way past the moon, so this will be helpful for lunar operations. It also has a Communicatron 32 omnidirectional antenna for communicating with the ground. It carries nitrogen and a 1 kilonewton that actually provides half a kilonewton of thruster, which runs on nitrogen. Not the most efficient option, but it allows me to also use these thrusters on nitrogen, so we only have to carry 1 type of fuel, which is great. And it also has a battery and some cones and things, and actually an inline reaction wheel. So yes, that is the whole vehicle. And yeah, let's go and see it fly. So yes, with that, let us take flight for the first... Oh, yeah. takes a while to throttle up engines in real life. So what happened there is I launched, the engines obviously didn't throttle up because they take a little while, and it crashed into the launch pad. That's not the best first launch. We didn't get very far, but anyway, let's try again. We'll fire the engines, let it throttle up, and then release it from the launch clamps. Launching, of course, the Athena 1 aboard the Taurus 1 launch vehicle, rising skyward now, heading up towards space, towards orbit, taking the satellite to its destination to test the first rocket. However, I start to turn a little too much, and Ferrum Aerospace is a tricky mod, and it flips out and destroys the rocket. Thank God this isn't a career mode, or I might be running out of money. Anyway, so now we've put some fins on the bottom, we've got everything locked, we fire up the engines, release it, and it goes up skyward, and hopefully we'll get to space this time. So yes, like I said, this is the Taurus 1 vehicle. You know all of the ins and outs. I thought it would be fun because in this, in Realism Overhaul, there's so much detail that goes into each rocket. I thought it would be a good idea to do what I just did and kind of go in and explain each part of the rocket. If you like that, you know, say, and if not, maybe I won't do it all the time. And as I play more, I'll get better and more proficient at explaining all of the parts as I get a better feel for them. Anyway, we're having a little bit of a hard time launching. I haven't tipped over quite nearly at all enough, and we're going a little steeply, but everything's looking fine. It's been a bit shaky because it is a little hard to fly in Ferrum Aerospace, but I'm getting used to it. However, then we hit the decoupler, and it doesn't decouple. Apparently, I forgot a decoupler, and this base, this interstage base, although it says it decouples, does not decouple. So I'm going to have to burn it off. So we're going to waste a little fuel now, burning the interstage fairing off so that we can separate the rocket, because yeah, apparently it didn't work quite how I thought it would. And then we're in a bit of a spin, we drop the fairings, and we get going. So you can see the payload again there now, and we're progressing on into orbit. We've got a pretty good trajectory. It looks like we will get into orbit fine at about 300 kilometers, so that's actually pretty good, pretty low orbit. Obviously the launch profile wasn't perfect because it takes a while to get used to an entirely new planet, but it's looking good so far. The hydrogen and oxygen burning engine pushing us on into orbit quite well, not getting too close to our periapsis, to our apoapsis, and we are doing fine. This satellite, of course, is fairly rudimentary. It's fairly basic at this point. It is a communications satellite, and hopefully it will be able to help us with our mission to go to the moon, because there's a lot of ground bases on the Earth so that we have coverage most of the time, but it's good to have a few satellites up, and I needed to launch a test payload anyway to kind of, you know, test out the first rocket, test my skills, learn as much as I can before I build bigger rockets. And this is a pretty small rocket, as you saw in the VAB. It's got, I think, like 2 and a bit meters wide, kind of, you know, fairly small. Anyway, the payload, though, is also very small. It's about 800 kilograms, so we didn't need a big rocket. Anyway, now we're going to decouple it, and there it is, in orbit, rather beautifully. The third launch went really quite well, I think, except for the decoupler incident. Anyway, so yes, we fire up the engine for a bit of a test. That works fine. We start turning the spacecraft to test the reaction wheel. That is working fine as well. We're going to test those nitrogen thrusters. They work fine as well. So all systems, all propulsion and maneuvering systems are online and working. Deploying our solar panels so we can start getting power to, power our communications equipment. That goes fine. Deploy the omnidirectional antenna and deploy the dish. But now we're going to need more satellites. It's time to move on to our second mission now. The first one is complete. So I'm going to hand you back over to past me to explain the vehicle right now. Yes, me again with the Athena 2, vehicle, and the rocket is actually the same. It's a Minotaur 1. Obviously it has been upgraded slightly, including the wings, the fins we put on there before to stop it flipping out with Ferrum Aerospace. And but the rocket is entirely the same except for these little boosters. They're Castor 1 solid rocket boosters. I think they provide about 200 kilonewtons of thrust and allow me to get off the pad more quickly with a heavier payload and provide a little bit of extra delta V. But the rest of the rocket is exactly the same, so we'll skip over that. The payload is 3 satellites, pretty much the same, well, very similar to the Athena 1, but they are slightly more capable, slightly more compact, and generally better. So each of these has 4 solar panels because it's taking 2 Communicatron HG55s so that it can communicate with the moon and an active vessel wherever it may be. These are headed for geostationary orbit, by the way, and they are, this whole payload mass is 2.1 tons. And yeah, they're basically the same. They have the reaction wheel moved down here since they can't have a cone on top anymore because they have to be stacked. And their thrusters have also been moved down here as well. The nitrogen fuel has been moved inside the satellite bus, but everything else is basically the same. So yes, let's go and see these fly right now. So yes, that is the vehicle. It is now on the pad. Its payload is about 2 tons, and I'm hoping that with the extra solid rocket boosters and everything else, this should be able to put them into a high orbit, hopefully a geosynchronous orbit, but we're going to see. We're going to see the kind of how well this rocket can perform now. Now the launch doesn't go perfectly. It's gone pretty well so far, but I start losing control a little bit and diverging off course. So we will lose a little bit of delta V there. You can see we turned right quite seriously. I don't think that's the kind of profile real rockets take. This one's a little shallower than before. I'm kind of honing it a little bit, but I'm keeping it fairly steep since we are heading for a geosynchronous orbit. However, it's looking like I won't actually have enough delta V, so I'm just going to go for a slightly higher orbit than before with this 2-ton payload of 3 satellites. Now the fairings are deployed and everything. You can see them all stacked there, sitting quite nicely. But yeah, it was about at this point I was, well, very certain that I wouldn't be able to go to a geosynchronous orbit with this rocket with a 2-ton payload. That's sort of around, well, a little less than the mass the original Falcon 9 could put into geostationary orbit, and the actual full thrust new massive Falcon 9 in fully expendable mode can only put 8 tons to low Earth orbit, and it's computer controlled. So this is much smaller than that and controlled by not the best rocket pilot in the world. So yeah, it's not looking like it's going to be able to do that. But we should be able to get into something like a 500-kilometer orbit, although our periapsis might be a little bit low. But the main part of this mission was to test it. Today we're just kind of testing launch vehicles, getting into the swing of things before we start launching really important payloads like probes to the moon or Kerbals into orbit and eventually Kerbals to the moon. We want to really get an idea. I mean, this is just a test rocket. I'm probably not even going to keep it around that long. We're probably going to need bigger rockets very soon. So, yeah, it's, well, we're learning. Anyway, though, it looks like we actually will run out of delta V before we get into a 500-kilometer orbit. But luckily, there is some fuel on the satellites. Not a ton. Some of it wasn't actually loaded, it turns out, and it's not very efficient to use a nitrogen thruster for your main propellant, but these satellites aren't really made to go very far, so we'll do what we can. So yes, the second stage burns out. We are almost in orbit. So now we're going to fire up the little 1 kilonewton thruster, which actually only provides half a kilonewton of thrust, so that's kind of a bit of a misnomer. But it does get us into some kind of orbit, not a circular orbit, but a decent, safe orbit nonetheless. And yeah, all is good. So fairly successful first test. If I'd flown it actually properly to get to a 500-kilometer orbit, maybe I could have done that. But since I was heading for GTO, I kind of burned too much fuel to really achieve this. So anyway, though, the satellites are in orbit, and there's just more comm satellites in orbit. It's good to have just a lot. That was my strategy in Road to Colonization. Anyway, so we've separated the satellites now. Now we're going to deploy everything. We've deployed the antenna. We're going to point it at the moon and the other one at the active vessel, just so we get some system coverage. And we've also deployed our solar panels and everything else. We do the same with the other 3 satellites. But now, after the second mission being semi-successful, we're going to need a bigger rocket to actually put 3 satellites in GTO. So I'm going to pass you over to past me again to explain the bigger rocket and everything else. So yes, here is our bigger rocket for performing the task that the Taurus 1 vehicle could never do. It was just too small, and I've got it here for comparison and also have hangar extender on. You can see this just allows me to extend the hangar right here. Anyway, so yes, it's a much bigger vehicle. However, it is a little bit deceiving because the lower stage of the Minotaur, of the Taurus 1, I swear to God I'll remember the animal, of the Taurus 1 was kerosene and liquid oxygen, and kerosene is much more dense than the liquid hydrogen that this is using. So it is a bigger rocket and a more powerful rocket, but it is a little bit deceiving. So yes, we're going to throw this away now. Now this is almost kind of Falcon 9 sized. It's 4.3 meters in diameter, but just not quite as tall. But yes, let's go through this rocket now. So it is a single-engined rocket. It's using the what is it? The RD-120, which provides 1900 kilonewtons of thrust and was used on the first stage of the Energia rocket, the Russian rocket. It also does carry fins, but despite this having 1900 kilonewtons of thrust, is a little bit too big to get off the pad quickly, hence it carrying 4 GEM 40 solid rocket boosters. Now these provide 660-ish kilonewtons of thrust, I can't remember exactly, and these were used in real life on the Delta II rocket, and yes, with all that extra thrust, it pretty much more than doubles the thrust at launch, which allows me to, which allows the rocket to get to about 10 or 11 kilometers up before it drops them and will have a lot of speed, and allows it just to get off the pad even though the engine isn't quite powerful enough to lift it very quickly. So yeah, that's the first stage, and as I said, it's all powered by liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. The upper stage, between this interstage fairing, we have another liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen second stage, and the engine this is using is the LR87 LH2 vacuum. This has it's about 660 kilonewtons of thrust, maybe 670, around there, so similar to the rocket, solid rocket boosters actually. Yeah, this is what is this? It's from the Titan rockets, I believe, the second stage of the Titan rockets, and yeah, with all that thrust, it powers all of this pretty well. Again, liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen. In total, this whole rocket has about 12 to 13,000 meters per second of delta V, so should definitely be able to go to geosynchronous orbit. Anyway, we're going to throw this over there and take a look at the payload, although not, because it's the exact same. So yes, that is the rocket. I hope I did a good job of explaining it, and we'll get back to the launch. So yes, here we are on the pad with our Taurus 2 vehicle and our Athena 3 mission, the 2-ton payload, which will hopefully get to GTO this time. That's geosynchronous transfer orbit. Actually, we're going for a geosynchronous orbit. The transfer orbit is just getting to the place, but not a circular orbit. Anyway, so yes, it takes off with its 4 boosters carrying it skyward. It should get up to about 10 kilometers, actually more than that before they burn out, and then we'll be able to propel ourselves on into orbit. This actually gets a pretty nice launch profile. It's the least squirrely one I've had, and it goes, yeah, I think at a pretty good arc. Probably still a little too steep, but since we're heading to geosynchronous orbit, it's not too bad because we need to go really high anyway. And yeah, I'm really liking this rocket. I think this could actually be useful. I might keep this around for these kind of launches because, well, it's just working quite nicely. And I do like having single-engined rockets. Often I go for the Falcon 9 approach with as many small ones as possible, but I like the look of a single-engined rocket. The first stage actually takes us all the way into space and is still burning, so we deploy our fairings early because, yeah, the little tiny payload on top does look a little bit ridiculous, but of course this is, well, it is Realism Overhaul, and we are going to geostationary orbit, hopefully at least. And anyway, now we're firing up our second stage, and we'll push ourselves on into orbit, and then of course extend our apoapsis out to about 35,000 kilometers, a little more than that, but around there. So yes, this has gone quite nicely. In the 3 launches I've done today and the few failures, I've learned a lot. I've gotten, seem to have gotten somewhat proficient at launching rockets. I have only launched out of Cape Canaveral today, by the way. I didn't mention that, but yes, we've been launching out of Cape Canaveral in Florida. So these actually won't go to a geosynchronous orbit, a geostationary orbit, because they're inclined, but they may go to a geosynchronous, but just not geostationary. Anyway. It looks like once we extend our orbit out, we will have about 1,500 meters per second of delta V left, which will allow us to circularize the orbit and get these into a good high orbit to give good coverage of the whole system. However, the LR87 LH2 engine can only be ignited once. Yes, that is part of Realism Overhaul, real ignition systems, which means this one can only be ignited once. The engine I was using on the second stage of the Taurus 1 could be ignited 8 times, but I just didn't check on this one, so that means we've just lost the delta V, which would put us into a circular orbit. And these probes, although they do have a little bit of delta V, definitely do not have enough. But nonetheless, I deploy them, decouple them, and now I'm going to get them into well, not even circular, but I'm going to get them into as high an orbit as possible using their engines. I'm going to do it at separate times and try and spread them out across the orbit so they at least give some coverage. It's been a bit of a farce of an episode, I have to say. But we've deployed the first one, we've deployed all of their antennas pointing at Earth, and the other ones will point at the active vessel from now on. We get this one pointing straight ahead using its thrusters to try and keep it under control, and once it's pointing the right way, we'll fire up the engine, burn off the, I think, like under 100 meters per second of delta V it has, and get it into a very slightly more circular orbit, but it's still going to be pretty elliptical. We may launch some more satellites into an actual geostationary orbit next episode before we start doing more interesting things. But for now, I think it's fine. There's enough ground stations. I mean, you can see the ground coverage we have. That this was more of a test than anything else. After a while, I did cut through the burn because these burns take a while, and we get to about our periapsis out to about 1 million meters, which isn't too bad, but not ideal. And then we go back to the other two satellites of Athena 3, and we're going to do a few orbits until we're significantly ahead of the first satellite, then deploy the second one, and then do the same so that they're spread out across the orbit so they at least provide some coverage. These won't be useless, but they won't be nearly as useful as if they were in a geosynchronous orbit, so that we always had 3 satellites in a very high orbit. Now we're only ever going to have 1 satellite at a time in a very high orbit. Anyway, though, after a bunch of warping, we do get to a place where it looks like we're sort of maybe a third. It's hard to tell with ellipses. With circles, it's very easy, but with ellipses, due to orbital speeds, it's very hard to tell when you're actually a third of the way in front of your orbit. Yeah. But anyway, we'll deploy these now. They kind of junk off each other in a very inelegant way. We're very, we're not super gentle with our space probes when we probably should be. But anyway, so yes, this is gonna do the same as before, so we'll cut through most of it until we get to about 1 million meters of periapsis, and that's looking rather good. A lot of remote tech lines. The Realism Overhaul mods I'm using, by the way, are just installed by using CCAN to install the whole Realism Overhaul package. So that's how I've done that. So I don't really have a mod list, I just use CCAN. It just makes it really easy. You can download CCAN and then click Realism Overhaul and it'll install all the shit. So that's good. Anyway, we get that all lined up and it's looking still pretty messy actually. They're not even properly phased right, but whatever. It's been a semi-successful episode. So we've had one very successful mission. One sort of, and then 2 sort of successful missions, which didn't quite meet the mark. Next time we'll probably upgrade the Taurus 2 to have, you know, a second stage engine with more than 1 ignition, because that's kind of really necessary. But yeah. Until then, though, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you're looking forward to Realism Overhaul. A lot of people have asked me to do it, and I thought I'd do a little mini-series where I go and land on the moon. Maybe in the future I'll do another mini-series where I go somewhere else, where I maybe go to Mars, or just send probes to a bunch of places. We'll see. But for now, I'm just doing this to keep it kind of limited and, you know, concise. I hope you enjoyed the format as well. I thought, because the vehicles are going to be quite interesting in this series, I'd go to the VAB and talk through them live, just because, I don't know, it seemed like a fun thing to do. Like I said, as I play more, I'll get better at explaining them as I get a better feel for the parts. Today it was more kind of just a very cursory, this is the engine, this is the tank, this is the everything. So yeah. But anyway, like I said, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you're looking forward to this series. I know I am, and it'll be great to put some Kerbals on the moon. This has been KSP with Tape. I will see you next time.